So today I'm going to be talking about how to start the painting of this glass that we're going to be working on. So a lot of times with glass objects, they tend to be symmetrical. So with my drawing, and I'm doing this on a separate piece of paper, and then I would transfer it to my canvas. But you want to make sure that normally I put like a little bit of a straight line on my paper just as kind of a guide so that everything seems pretty symmetrical. And instead of starting with the bottom of the glass, I typically start off with the rim and do it in one motion, because sometimes if you try and match the side, it gets a little bit wavy. So try practicing it, doing it in one motion like this, and a lot of times it's a little bit smoother. And then from there, I want to see how the angle of the glass on the sides is, kind of getting a little bit smaller as it goes down. So I want to make sure that my glass also does that. And the bottom of the glass is going to be curved just like the top. So I'm going to go ahead and curve that. Our lime is kind of in the middle of the glass. You're not really going to see this part actually. So once I draw that, I would erase it. Obviously this is a rough sketch just to show y'all how to go about it. And if you already have your sketch, you can always skip this part. So, but that's about how I would start the sketch, and then from there I would start drawing in like the inside of my glass, looking at that curve. It's always helpful to turn it onto the side, especially when I'm trying to curve my bottom, because sometimes one side will be a little higher than the other. And for our ice, it's actually not going to line up exactly, because with water it tends to distort, the reflections of things. So you can kind of see how these two parts don't meet. So make sure that your drawing also reflects that. So, and then once you have your drawing done, you want to transfer it onto your canvas. If you're doing oil, if you're doing acrylic, you actually want to paint the background first and then transfer your drawing on top of that. So, and for our background, the way we're going to mix this is we're going to be making basically some different kinds of grays, just because in our photo you can kind of see how the background is gray fabric, which is actually an old apron. So you could do it exactly like the picture. If you want to do a little bit of a warmer gray or a cooler gray, that's perfectly fine. So in order to make kind of a nice neutral gray, I want to make sure on my palette I have a white, burnt sienna, and ultramarine blue. And then I also have my other two primaries, because sometimes with your gray, if it's too purple, I add some yellow. If it's too green gray, then I add a little red. So going back to our color wheel, you always want to think back to that. So, the best way to get more of neutral colors or toning down colors is always adding the complement. Very small amounts, because if you use a lot, it's just going to completely change the color and you'll end up with a reddish gray instead of toning down the gray. So like yellow and purple are across from each other, so they're complementary. Blue and orange, red and green. So always keep thinking about that. And burnt sienna and ultramarine blue are great for grays, because burnt sienna is basically a orangish brown. So it basically is like the complement. So what I would do first is mixing a nice gray. So a lot of times I'll use a palette knife to mix colors. So I might take burnt sienna, add some ultramarine blue. I know it's so dark, it's probably hard to see what color that is. Maybe a little bit more blue. And sometimes if I notice, oh my gosh, there's so much brown in here, I might have to take that portion to the side and add a little more blue to it. And then this is a very good dark gray, but I'm going to make a little lighter by adding a little bit of titanium white. And there you go. That's a really nice, let me see if y'all can see that a little better. So this is a very nice bluey gray, like the picture. So this is going to be my darkest dark. And then I would also take a little bit of that portion and mix a little more white into it, so that I have a medium gray. So, and I would make big amounts, especially since this is a background, we want it to kind of match all over. So if I was doing this in acrylic, I want to make sure I paint my entire canvas before I transfer my drawing. So this makes it a little bit more simpler, but also you have to be a little bit faster just because acrylic dries so much faster. So I'm doing the same thing with that burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And making a nice dark gray. So for your background, if you're painting it, you could do it all one solid color, or you could have a little bit of variation to it. I do not have any white acrylic at this moment, so we're going to pretend. But you want to make sure you paint the whole entire canvas. And when I'm painting, a lot of times I'm going like back and forth and kind of doing a crisscross motion. And for this one, I'm just kind of having a little fun with it, filling. And if I need help kind of spreading the paint with acrylic, not with oil, I could add a little water to it. But you don't want to add too much water, because what happens is it's going to get too thin and it's going to just start lifting off the canvas rather than going on there. So that's why sometimes mediums are a little bit better than water. So, and of course I would also use white, because by themselves, these colors sometimes are a little bit transparent and not very thick. So a little bit of white helps that. So painting the whole entire canvas. And then for oil, whoops, got a little acrylic on there. That's okay. So for the oil, what I want to do is have my drawing transferred already. And then I'm going to start coming in with, I like to use flat brushes. Filberts are also good, but I like flat brushes because they give a nice edge to the painting, especially when I'm trying to go around sharp areas. So in our picture, you can see how a lot of this area is dark in here and the shadow. So I'm looking for those dark spots first. And I'm going all the way up to my glass. Like that. I'm trying to do it more of a shape rather than an outline, because you want to make sure you don't have, you know, it be obvious that you painted the background afterwards. So I'm just blocking in the dark. So there's a little bit of dark in my shadow. And at this point, just like with acrylic and water, you could always come in and add a little bit of liquid to your background color if you want it to spread a little bit better. But again, you don't want to add too much of that, or else it'll start just getting too runny and it's not going to cover as much space as you need it to. And I'm going to put a little bit inside my glass also. So I'm not trying to paint over my drawing. I mean, you could, and then try and find it again. But I'm just trying to use a little bit of it so it's keeping that same value inside the glass, because that's what gives this painting its illusion of transparency, is having the same values and colors that are in your background in your glass, because it's supposed to be see-through. So, and then I would come in even lighter. And then eventually, I really want to make sure that the front of the glass is really light. Not like super white, but it's pretty light. So I'm not going to waste your time filling the whole entire thing, but I would want to fill all of this area except for this little spot over here. And then I would also come in with that gray, and you can see how, so this is a background I already finished. Even down here in the glass, there is a little bit of gray showing. So I want to make sure while I still have that gray, if you have time, I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of that gray inside of my glass as well. Not really filling the whole thing, because there's also other colors we don't want to get lost in there, but a little bit. And then once I have all this done, then I would want to use a nice soft brush, pretend it's all done, a nice soft brush to go back and forth and to softly blend my colors. So if I wasn't too afraid of losing like the rim of this painting, I could go like this back and forth. So, and obviously this is on a canvas panel, so it's a little rougher than like smoother canvas. If you ever have a really, really rough canvas, you could always use gesso on it first to get it a little smoother. And then, while this is still wet, I could come in and make this yellowish orange color, where I'm going to take some bright yellow and a little bit of burnt sienna. And you can always wait if you're not sure if you want to do this part or not. But I made kind of a nice orangish color with that burnt sienna and yellow. If I wanted it more orange, I probably needed to add a little bit more red. Yeah, I need a little more red. Remember, just like earlier was that cadmium red. And as I go forward, I'm going to use more yellow. And a little bit of white and yellow. So, and then there's also a little bit of that yellow and white over here. Obviously, if it's too wet, it's just going to turn into muck. So you could always wait and do that later. So, and then while this is wet, I can go ahead and blend it. So I probably wouldn't want to use this brush because it's covered in yellow. But I'm going to go ahead and use a slightly softer brush, and I'm just going to go in between these two. And softening edges with canvas panels does not work very well. So if you ever end up having a lot of like this rough texture, that's a lot of times your canvas. It's not really your paint. So you sometimes, sorry, you sometimes have to compensate and use more paint, or, you know, make sure to prep your canvas before you work on this part. So that's how I would start your background, and then we're going to continue working on the rest of this next week.